Okay, so welcome to our online audience. We're in the second week of our Testify series, which means we move all the hype to the end of the service, and we just sit down right away in these comfy chairs, and we just talk about life. And each week we'll have a different person telling a story from their life, and then you guys get to ask questions, and we get to learn about life and Jesus through that. So, without further ado, this week's Testify is Nate Johnson.
What up? I'll give you guys just kind of a background, but I'm going to start in high school, but just so you guys kind of knew the situation I grew up in. So for me, my parents got divorced when I was born, so even though I had like divorced parents, it wasn't like it happened when I was aware of it. So it was just kind of, I was born into that, so it wasn't like, yeah. I also my mom had remarried when I was only 6 months old. So there was like a father presence in the house, even though he was disabled. So it makes it a little bit different. He was blind and was losing it mentally as well. So that made it a little bit different too. But with that, it had set us up for a situation where we went through a lot of problems with poverty as a family. So we lived in government housing. My stepdad wasn't able to work because of his disability. He got disability checks, but those aren't very much. And then my mom had to work a couple jobs, and at that point, she was already operating like a single mom would, just because of the situation. I had 2 younger brothers, 1 older sister. So that's kind of like the background of the home life I was going through. And unfortunately with my stepdad, because of him being blind and it affecting his mental capacity, he became abusive as well. Just a lot of it was because of misunderstandings that he had and that he didn't know really what was like going on around him. So he thought like, hey, I asked you to do this thing and it's been 2 hours when it had literally been 5 minutes, right? So that's kind of where everything was at. And I was really starting to become aware of the world in the way of, okay, what should a family structure look like? This is about probably 6th, 7th grade when I started to realize like, oh, when I go to a friend's house and they have both parents around and, we eat good over there and like things like that. Like it's not like, hey, we're gonna dump out this can of green beans and maybe there's some extra top ramen packets, right? So it's just different. You start to realize like, oh, this isn't like the experience that I'm used to having. So that's kind of when I first started being aware of what was going on around me. And unfortunately, all through middle school, I started to think like, oh, because I'm born into poverty and because this is what's around me, like, this is what I deserve. There's some reason I deserve this because other people have more than me. There must be something going on in their life where they deserve more, right? So that's kind of the mindset I was developing. And then it turned into, well, what can I do to be more deserving? What can I do to earn more things, right? And this isn't out of any kind of like Christian mindset. There was no normal church, I'll say, around that we attended. We attended a old apostolic Lutheran church a couple times when I was younger, but there was no faith in the house or anything like that. And what really happened was I started finding my worth in football just because it was something that I was good at. And then I was thinking like, man, if I'm really good at football, maybe I can get a scholarship. And if I get a scholarship, I can go to college. And if I can go to college and get a good education, I can get a good job and I don't have to live like this. Like I don't want to live like this anymore. I didn't like that, even though I was very like thankful for it. Like it's not comfortable as a kid. And some of you might have gone through this too. Like when your presents are dropped off the day before donated by the fire department and no kid likes going to the food bank to get their food, right? Like that's not what I wanted for my children when I was older. So football it was for me. I was like, all right, I'm going to be really good at football. I'm going to try to get a scholarship. I'm going to try to get an education and be really good in it. It took me a while. I worked really hard. And I felt like I was getting pretty good at it. I was able to start on varsity my freshman year, which for football can be tough because sometimes you just need size. And luckily, just like I got my beard early, which at the time was not cool, by the way. It's not cool to have a beard in 8th grade. It was cool later, like my sophomore year, but not cool then. But I grew fast too, so that helped for football because I was as big as some of the seniors. So did all that kind of stuff, and I really started to feel like, okay, I'm working hard. I'm making I'm doing the right things. I hadn't gone to any parties. I hadn't drinking or doing any drugs and stuff like that. But unfortunately, as soon as I started becoming good at football, I already felt like I was deserving other things. So, if I had teammates who had nicer cleats than me, nicer gear than me, anyone who plays sports knows it's all about the accessories. So they've got all the extra like Nike wristbands, they've got the cutter's gloves, like all the stuff. And I'm like, man, I should be having all that. I'm one of the best players on the team. Why don't I have that? I deserve that. And so I was looking for any way I could to try to get some extra money, and didn't come about that necessarily legally. So the first time I got hurt, I was given Vicodin and Oxycontin. So those are narcotic pharmaceutical pills. And to me, I was always I don't need to take any pills. I'm good. I'll live through the pain, which my wife hates to this day. So even when I won't take ibuprofen. So what I did was I ended up realizing that those had value to people, right? And so I could sell those and be able to keep going back to the doctor and be like, yeah, I'm still dealing with the headaches and the migraines. I still need this. I still need that, and getting more pills and selling them. So that was my way of me justifying, like, hey, I deserve this stuff, so it's okay, and I'm not the one doing the drugs. If I don't sell them, they're going to get them from somebody else anyways. So, I might as well, it might as well be me who gets the money, right? And so that's kind of where I started to develop that. And then the other part of it was, with that ego that was developing, was some pretty poor dating habits and choices. So if any of you guys in the senior high group know why I bug you so much, it's because I'm speaking from some truth there. So, but all that really kind of hit me at once when my mom basically, I saw how hard she worked for our family, and I saw how hard she worked for us, and knowing like, hey, I'm sacrificing and doing all this so you guys can be fed and clothed and have a roof over your head, but I don't want you guys to live this life. And when she found out all the stuff I was doing, because she's not stupid, and if I say like, oh, I got this money from a poker game, which was the lie I tried to tell, she started figuring things out, right? So eventually I came to a point where I had to come clean, and the hard part was I probably didn't feel as guilty as I should. I only felt guilty because I knew I upset her, but I still felt like validated, like I deserve this, like whatever. And she did the smartest thing she could do, which was say, all right, you choose. You go to youth group, and again, this wasn't a Christian home. She just wanted me to have good influences. She said, you're going to a youth group, or you can't play football anymore. Your choice. So that's how I actually ended up coming to the Diff for the first time. Chris might remember that. Jess might remember that. I had the hoodie up, the earphones in, wasn't going to talk to anybody, had my non-Christian rap music in my ears. I'm like, I'm just going to sit here and be here because this is what I'm supposed to do, right? And I remember the next day in math class, to this day, in Chris Gray's voice, and I won't impersonate it this time so I don't blow the mic out, but but I remember reading a text the next day that was like, hey, we're so happy that you came to youth group. I hope to see you next week, something like that, right? And that was, one of the first times I had a positive experience like that, where it wasn't like, hey, good game or something like that. So I was like, well, I have to anyways because my mom wants me to go, so I don't really have a choice. So I ended up coming back to youth group again, and still had a lot of struggles with a lot of those things. And I've always joked that when it comes to me hearing from God, like the reason I've been able to hear from him so clearly is because he makes it pretty obvious, because I'm not a person who catches on to things easily. So when coming to youth group didn't stop any of those things I was doing. It took some big time injuries that made it so I couldn't play anymore to start waking up. Because then I realized, like, okay, football's gone. I've built my whole life around this and this ego around football. And if that's gone, what do I have? Who am I, right? And that started looking pretty bleak. I had a lot of time on my hands because I spent a lot of time training and working for football. So I ended up picking up my brother's guitar and playing some music, some typical sophomore, I call it the sad boy music. Like, I'm going to play my acoustic guitar with all my emotions, right? Yeah. So
I'm very familiar, yes.
so that's where that all started. And then it ended up being that I kind of just like, I needed an outlet and something to do. And my heart had started changing. Like, I started to realize, like, I need to do something else. And because I started getting worried for my future, because I've, again, from the beginning, since 6th grade, when I knew, like, hey, this isn't the lifestyle or the family life I want, I was afraid, because I was like, okay, well, plan A is gone. I never made a plan B. Like, what am I going to do to change my life so I don't go through these cycles again? And I had thought that was football, right? Like, not necessarily football, like, professionally, but at least to get me the education and everything. And so I start kind of waking up a little bit. I started playing on the worship team. I ended up going to summer camp, and I did it was the mission trip that we did. I always forget to Arlington. And Arlington was interesting because there was a girl I was dating who is like just the definition of what a toxic relationship is. And it's bad when your youth pastor has to mediate a breakup. That's all I'm going to say. But what ended up happening was she knew that I wanted to start living a different life. And she wasn't like cool with that. She was like, nah, I'm going to keep popping pills and I'm going to keep going to these things. And that's who I'm going to be. And I was like, well, that's not what I want. But being a stupid boy with bad dating habits, like, right, there was reasons why I wanted to be in that relationship, and I'll leave that there. But we go to leave Arlington, and here's where God gets in my face again, because he knows I'm too stupid just to give me subtle hints. Like, I literally think that, like, the burning bush, like, why did that have to happen? That would have been me, right? Because he's like, bro, you're really not getting it. But so we go to leave this town that we're doing this mission trip on. There was this lady in the town, and she was a member at the church that we went there to help, like, fix up and paint and do all their landscaping and everything like that. And when we were all leaving, some of the people from the town came to, like, thank us and say goodbye. I had not interacted with this lady. She had not talked to the church. The only person who knew everything was happening was Chris. I told her the night before, like, hey, here's the text messages I had with this girl. Here's what's happening. So it was like her, and I think maybe a couple students were in the room and might have heard it. So that was it. That was the night before. So early next day, we're going to leave, and these people are like hugging us, and I go to hug this old lady, and it happens right in front of Chris, right? She like locks onto me with like a death grip that I don't think that she even really had the strength for. I was confused right there. So she like locks onto me with this death grip, and she just says, God wants me to tell you that you need to leave the woman you're with because she's not strong in her faith, and that he has a plan for you, and he has a woman for you, and you're going to do great things, but this girl can't be it, right? And that was like, what is happening? I just said I'm cool with like talking to this Jesus guy, and like this craziness just happened, right? Like I hadn't even been baptized yet. I was going to get baptized after this trip. So all this, like, I was like, okay, like, that's weird. Like, Chris had to talk to me about that. Like, are you okay?
I was literally like, I looked at my other leader and I go, I don't know if I should thank Jesus or call 911. Like, that lady is like in his face.
Yeah, I definitely didn't do as dramatic as an impersonation as it was, but yeah, it was pretty wild. And so what happened from there is we came back, I got baptized. Like, that was kind of the final, like, all right, I got to listen, right? That was too weird not to. So I listened to that, and then that I think is what was my biggest turning point. It was right there when I got baptized, and I was like, okay, this girl is part of the issue. I got to cut this off. I got to remove myself from influences. So much so that I had to, it was a really hard decision, but I chose to do Running Start, and it wasn't because I was like, I'm going to get a jump on my education and do the right thing. It was, if I don't get away from the things that I've always been doing, I'm going to keep getting the same results that I've always had, right? And so I knew I had to remove myself from that environment. So in came Clark and all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, there was also a cute girl at youth group I started becoming really good friends with. So She's tall, has curly hair. Some of you know her. But I finally started doing the right things, but the hardest part for me is, and to this day it's still a struggle for me, is I am such a control freak, and I'm always like, we'll be on a drive and not talking, and Jess will be like, what are you thinking about? And I'm like, I'm just kind of trying to think of like what we're doing in the next 5 to 7 years, right? Like that's always where my brain is at. I know it's weird. And so for me, like, the whole typical like, oh, I'm just going to go do things, I'm going to plan everything out, like letting God control things, like letting his plan happen, that is an extreme struggle of mine, right? So even though I had decided like I'm going to do, the right things, be a good person, it was still hard for me to go, okay, I'm going to do what God wants for me, I'm going to do God's plan for me, and that kind of stuff. So from there, what really started happening was I had to develop like habits, right? A was getting away from the negative influences and making sure I was in a place where, okay, I can grow as a Christian and develop this relationship with God. But then B was I had to start taking like those actual action steps, right? So to me, some of that's as easy as prayer. Prayer became my like biggest habit. My mom had given me something when I complained about how poor we were all the time, and it's really cheesy, but it was like a thankfulness rock. And she told me to put it in my pocket, and she's like, every time you feel that, she was like, you have to say something you're thankful for, right? Because I was pretty angry, even once I realized the concept of God, that he would put me in that situation. And so she was intentional about making sure that, okay, like you're gonna realize that life's not about money and you have things to be thankful for. So that was a whole process. Decided for the next part when I date again, which ended up being that cute curly-headed girl, that I would do everything like the super right way. Like I'm like, this can't look like anything like what it looked like before. And so I had looked up like courting and courtship and all that kind of stuff, and that's a whole other sermon. Like any of y'all who need to know about that, like first of all, start on your YouVersion, but then ask a leader. But started changing the dating habits because I was like, I realized like, okay, I can't throw this away. This girl's pretty cool, and if I do things like I did before, this is gonna be gone. And she knew that. Like she wasn't playing games with me. When I first like told her like, hey, I want to like hang out with you, she's like, it's gonna be a different girl next month. I'm not wasting my time, right? So savage mode, but it was the hard truth, right? And so really what it was like having to learn to like submit to God and trust that he has a plan for me, but it's not going to happen if I'm not going to be willing to go through the steps I need to do, right? Because it's so easy to be like, all right, God, like I want to do the things that you want me to do. I want to have the things you want to have for me, but I don't want to give up those friends. Or, all right, God, like I get it. I need to stop doing these things, but I'm not going to stop listening to music that's telling me to do these things, right? And so that was my biggest awakening, was I had to remove anything that was like a negative influence for me. And for some of us, like some of you guys, that's going to look like something different. But I had to remove all of those things that were contributing factors to this lifestyle that I was living, right? And the cool thing is over time, then it started taking shape, like what God had planned for me. And it was way cooler than I could have ever imagined, right? Like I came to a place about my summer before my senior year when I was like, all I want to do is like serve people and help kids go through what I went through, right? And that's all I wanted. And then again, that's when God hit me with another slap in the face, like, you never listen, I'm going to show you again. And that was, we were at summer camp, and I had the same reoccurring dream for a week before summer camp, then every night of summer camp. And basically what happened in the dream was God was giving me a picture of my future. Like, if you listen to me, if you do these things that I'm telling you to do, here's what your future would look like. And in that dream, it was very simple, it was very short, but it was just like on a loop every night. And it was, I had a bunch of guys from a small group that I was a leader of over at my house, like staying the night, and Jessica was like making cookies and handing them to me to give to them, like have fun with the guys or whatever, right? And it was Jessica specifically in the dream, and that's why I was like, oh shoot, like this is serious. So I bring it to Chris, I'm like, hey, this is kind of freaking me out, what's happening? She's like, yeah, this is what's called like a vision from God and explains it to me. But she's like, here's the most important thing. Do not tell Jessica, right? So,
or her father is what I said.
So what did like hopeless romantic Nate do? Like go and like, all right, I'm gonna tell you about these dreams, right? So I try to pull that move, which by the way, that got me broken up with. So should have listened to my youth pastor. Ta-da. But like to me, that is just an example of like God has so much for all of us, and He has so many plans for all of us, but sometimes it takes like something pretty painful to realize. Like for me, it felt like God took football from me. Like, dude, I finally found something that I'm good at and that's going to give me like hope, and it's gone, right? But it was giving me the wrong hope. It was giving me the false hope, right? And so those kind of like things that I had to go through, to me was like, all right, He's got a plan, but I'm not even worthy of that plan until I deal with all of this stuff first, right? And so I think, if anything, that I'd want you guys to identify with that, if you are going through something that's a struggle, or you are even at the beginning of that phase where it's like, I feel like I've got to start changing some of these things, like most of the time there's a reason for it. And it's always hard in that moment. It's always hard to realize that, especially when you're young, because I'm still that way now. Like, I know what I want, I'm going to plan it, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make it happen, right? But for somebody to go, no, you don't even know what's coming, and before you even get what you don't know what's coming, I need you to change all these things. That's like, what are you talking about? So, yeah, you guys know who I am today, but yeah, that was a long process, and that's kind of led into where I'm at today.
Awesome. Nate, it's such an honor to have been your youth pastor, and now your co-leader, and at some point you'll understand how we feel about you when you're leading next to Diego and Gabe and all the kids that you have mentored. So part of Testify is you guys asking questions and me asking a couple of questions. I'll always ask the same three, but you're more creative than that. So as I ask mine, go ahead and think about what you want to ask Nate about that process or his choices or God or anything like that. I'm also going to give you guys a verse in a minute to bring all this home. So, but first is the question. First question, Nate. What did that story that you just testified about, what's the main thing you learned about God from that?
Definitely the main thing is His plans and what He wants for our life is always bigger than we can comprehend. Like, to this day, I feel like I still have like revelations of like, no, I'm getting you ready for something else and it's bigger, right? And so, because to me, the big idea was free education from football. And I'd say that that's small in comparison to what He wants me to do.
That's good. And what did you learn most about yourself?
I would say that probably the thing I learned most about myself was if if I can get out of my own way and remove the things that are an obstacle for me, that God showed me that I can be pretty disciplined.
Yeah. Okay, so last question from me. If you could give them one takeaway from your story that they can apply to their life, what would you want them to take away from your story?
I think the biggest thing would be it just starts with one good step, right? Like for me, that was, I got to get out of this high school. I got to change my environment because that's all I could control at the time. And so I think that that's something that if you guys are in a situation where you're like, I really am desperate for my life to change, or even if it's like smaller than that, but it feels big to you and it's like, I feel like I have toxic friendships, or I feel like, I don't have a safe dating relationship, or I feel like, I procrastinate with my homework too much, and I'm worried about my future. Like, it just takes one positive action to just start that ball rolling, right? And so that's the takeaway I'd want you guys to have, that you do, like, even though God's in control and God has a plan, you still have to take the step, right? He'll lay the path out. He'll be like, hey, here's the right thing to do, and we can still take the wrong step. So it's really up to us, even when He puts that in front of us, to take that right step. So, yeah.
That's good. Speaking of that, that brings us right to our verse for today. It's going to come up on the screen, but if you're online, I'm going to read it too. It's Proverbs 16:9, and it says, "We make our own plans, but the Lord decides where we will go." And there's two things I want you to take from that before you start asking your questions is God's plan for you is for your best. It's not to take things from you. It's to get you to what will make what you most want and need. And the second thing I want you to take from that verse is that the quicker you say yes to him and lean into those things, the less drastic of things he has to do to get your attention.
For real.
So he wants your best, but he'll also do whatever it takes to get you there. So take that from here. And so whether you're online or in the audience right now, if you're online, go ahead and type a question. We'll ask it live on your behalf. And if you're in the room, AJ's got a mic and he's going to go around. So just flag us down and we will answer your questions.
Can you hear me? Okay. I know for me, it's really hard to to have change and to have change in friend groups and different relationships. How did you get through that and make new relationships so quickly?
I think just putting myself in an environment where those things were, like when I left Prairie and started going to Clark, I didn't really make a lot of friends at Clark, but I knew I had youth group, so I started just like going to the extra youth group events, going to our small group events, and making sure I was at all of those. And then I kind of gained friends from that circle. And so it's not easy for everybody to do that. Like I've always been a really outgoing person, so I can, insert myself into a circle or something like that and just kind of start making conversation. But if that's not easy for you, I would probably say like if you have a friend who is a good influence, but you want to get away from your friend circle as a whole or those relationships as a whole, I'd pick someone who is a good influence and say like, hey, can you come to youth group with me, right? Or something like that. Even if it's not your strongest friendship, like it could be your best friend that's the bad influence and you've got this other person, and be honest, like send that text and be like, hey, I want to hang out with you more. You seem like a cool person and I want better influences in my life. Will you go to youth group with me or get coffee with me or whatever that might look like?
Sometimes you won't be able to just insert new people into your old ways of hanging out. Sometimes you'll have to create other avenues to do that.
Was it hard to make the positive steps? Was it easy or hard to try to do the right thing?
I mean, yes, like it was definitely a process, but I'm a really black and white thinker, and so once I had my mindset on this is what I want for my life, it became easy, right? Because it was just a matter of like, is this gonna benefit you? Yes or no? No? Okay, don't want it, don't need it, right? And so it was hard to come to that conclusion where I was able to make those decisions, but once I got there, I really just was good about asking myself, hey, is this going to be a good idea or not? And that's why I recommend changing your environment so much, because if you're in that environment, it's going to be harder, right? If you're in an environment that's facilitating those negative choices, it's going to be harder. It's the same concept when I tell myself this all the time, like I've been trying to lose weight really bad, right? And I struggle with like late night cravings. So when I have my cheat day where I can eat bad food and the cheat day's over, I take all of that food and I throw it away. That way when it's late night and I'm playing video games, I'm like, oh man, I could eat some Reese's right now. Well, there's no Reese's. I got rid of them. So I'm not going to dig them out of the trash. Like I'm not that desperate. So I'm good. And so it's that same concept though when we apply it to our life when we're trying to make those choices. We've got to change the environment and then it makes it easy, right?
And change comes easier when what you want later becomes more important than what you want right now.
Yeah.
That's everything. He started aiming himself different because he saw where it was leading, and that made his decisions easier.
After blowing it with the tall, curly-haired girl, how did you win her back?
That was that was a process that I messed up on, and I still am like, why did she come back? But for me, I think, and she might have a different answer, but I'd like to think it was the cool car that I got her attention with, but it wasn't. Probably wasn't really. But no, I really like that year that we were broken up. My biggest focus was, and I backed it up with cheesy Twitter things, but I was like, I'm going to be the best me I can be. So whether that's health, whether that's worshiping, whether that's being in my Bible, like I'm going all out on my future, my career, everything. And when you do that, when you're focusing on you, God's going to put a partner with you that is going to match what you need. And luckily, that was still that tall, curly-haired girl. So yeah, I think that was the biggest thing, was just focusing on what I wanted for my future.
I remember very clearly when he told me at camp what God told him. But I also remember very clearly when he called me and said, she just dumped me. I don't understand. Like, I thought I heard from God. Now I don't even know if I know the voice of God because I was so sure. And I told him, there's two things that are going to happen. Either you misheard and God has someone better for you, or she's coming back and you heard right. And he just had to walk through that until he knew he had heard right. Wave your hands wildly because it's really dark. We can't see you. All right, any more questions for me or Nate? Or do you just want to talk to the tall, curly-haired girl? That's what I feel like is happening. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. We are going to get ready for small groups. If you are on the online audience right now, we don't want you to be left out, so you can either hop on FaceTime or whatever with your small group if you're part of the Diff. If you are not part of the Diff, and I want you to create a small group. I want you to grab some accountability, start an Instagram convo, whatever you need to do to start a conversation in this area of your life. If you are part of the Diff, you are going to head to your small groups, and a couple of the girl leader to the right room, and then we will come back to worship and put God's spin on all that we're wrestling with. So I'm going to pray for you, and then we're going to head to small groups. Oh, God, I don't even know what to say. I'm just so thankful for this young man and his life and his decisions and your call in his life, and how you just so lovingly and gently and not gently sometimes brought him to where what you had for him. And I thank you that your story is not even over. Like he said, it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And I just pray for every student in the audience who can relate to that, any part of his story, that you just speak to them, that you show them their future, that you show them their worth, that you show them the idols in their life that aren't stable, that are going to break and fall if they lean on them, and point them back to you, God. And we just pray for our small group time, that you meet with us there and you meet with us in our worship time as we remind ourselves who you are, God. We just give you this and thank you for Nate's testimony. In your name, amen. All right, guys, head to small